Morgan Bengel, this young lady right here, is actually the site manager. She goes by a number of titles, assistant manager, resident manager, but site manager is the term. And she does a variety of things in terms of overseeing the whole operation, running tours, and a variety of other situations. So she's going to start off a slide presentation for a while to introduce you, to reintroduce you perhaps, to the copper mine and to the old Newgate prison. And then Wally Banzhaf, who you are familiar with, who has blessed us with a number of presentations, will follow up with some additional slide presentation. So I introduce Morgan to you, who is the site manager, and she will lead us on a tour of a historic location right in our own backyard.
Thank you, Dane.
All right, Morgan.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah?
Almost.
Almost? Here, okay. Hi everyone, thank you so much. I want to thank Wally for inviting me here to talk to you, and thank you, Dane, and all of you for welcoming me in. I told Wally that this was this is quite a blessing for me, because in the winter months I am based out of Hartford in the state office, but last week I started going back to Newgate. There's no heat and I don't have the water yet, so coming here for a hot lunch with you all is a very nice break in my day, so thank you. I was very cold this morning. It can't seem to warm up. So my goal right now is to give you a brief overview of Old Newgate Prison and Copper Mine, starting in the early 1700s all the way till today, and our future plans. So with that, I guess I would like to first ask, Dane mentioned that some of you have been there. By a show of hands, who has been to Old Newgate? Okay, that's what I figured, just to know who I'm talking to, so you'll have a good idea. I'll give you a brief overview nonetheless. Let's see. All right, so a couple distinctions. Old Newgate is considered a National Historic Landmark, which is top-notch for history sites. This is the peak of what you can achieve as a history site. It's recognized nationally for its significance. It's also a state archaeological preserve. So as Wally likes to tell people when he's volunteering, you can take nothing but pictures. So this means that everything that is on the site will be left there for future archaeologists to discover. We've only uncovered a few things. We've only dug up a few areas, so there's still a lot more to look for on the site. Our current mission is to promote the history and natural history of Old Newgate Prison and Copper Mine through exploration and discovery of the site as a copper mine, prison, and tourist attraction. This is a working mission since we just reopened last year, but it kind of encompasses what we want to accomplish right now. So with that, we focus on three different elements of the prison, of the site. So we refer to it as a prison most often, but it started as a copper mine, which I really like to emphasize to people. It was a copper mine in the early 1700s for about 66 years, on and off. And then it was a prison, which I'll get more into the logistics of that. It served as a prison for 54 years. And for about 200 years, it's been a tourist attraction. So even as a prison, tourists were coming there, so I'll tell you a little bit more about that too. Can everyone still hear me okay? Okay. So starting as a copper mine, this is an old map, an 1830s map of the copper mine, but they first started mining copper. The Simsbury colonists, because East Granby, as I'm sure you all know, was then part of Simsbury. So the Simsbury colonists heard rumor that there was copper, and as any good colonist does, they wanted to make some money off of it. So they started mining. It was then the first chartered copper mine in America, which is a big distinction. And these were businessmen. They had British connections, they had international connections, and it didn't really succeed. So they wanted to make it their big break, but due to regulations on smelting, they could not smelt on the property. They could not make it into metal. They had to take it to either England or Boston or a different off-site. And poor quality ore, we know that it wasn't very successful. So a bunch of different men tried. They kept leasing the land, but to no avail. And then again in the 1830s, after the prison closed, they tried to mine it. Two other companies came in. They thought with less regulation and more equipment, they would be able to mine. But alas, it's not a copper mine for that reason. So that's its time as a copper mine. And you see up in the corner I have the Higley copper coins, which I'm sure you've all heard of, but that was right down the street from where the prison itself is. Dr. Higley minted his own coins, and they were never recognized officially, but they did circulate. We don't have those, but the Connecticut Historical Society has a couple, and they're priceless, as you can imagine. So then it was a prison. They abandoned it as a copper mine. Like I said, it wasn't very successful. And they sent a few guys out to see if an abandoned copper mine would work as a prison. Their goal was to start to reform prisoners in lieu of capital and corporal punishment. So this was, on the onset, a sort of prison reform. It's considered the first state prison. So it's definitely one of the earlier ones. Before that were just jails and debtors' jails, things like that. Due to lack of security, they kept having to improvise. So none of this, so these are all the buildings that you see here, but none of it was there when they started putting prisoners in. They simply put them in the copper mine and thought they could get them to work. The first one, his name was John Hinson, and he escaped within 18 days. As a result, they kept building new walls and new buildings, trying to figure it out. Again, this was the first state prison, and it was trial and error for them. During the American Revolution, it served as a prison for loyalists, otherwise known as Tories, who were, loyal to the British Crown. So they were imprisoned here. And George Washington sent men who were court-martialed there. And eventually, in the 1820s, it started declining. Penitentiaries were rising up in places like New York and Massachusetts. They were new, cutting edge, and Newgate couldn't compete with those. They were, the buildings weren't adequate. It was still seen as inhumane, and reformers were having a heyday because it was not proper for people to stay there. So they eventually closed in 1827, and they marched all of the prisoners to the Wethersfield State Prison, which is now a DMV. But that was the, yeah, right. That's a good laugh. So that turned into the new state prison, and they shut Newgate down. But people kept going there. As a prison, we know that visitors were flocking to the site. We know that they were staying at the tavern and inn right across the road. And they were paying the guards extra money on the side to let them down into the mine and check things out. So we know that was happening. So when it closed as a prison, it's not a surprise that they continued to come. And private owners took over, and they made it into a destination. They advertised the scenery. They built these platforms on top of the buildings for people to do the lookout. And I'm sure if you've been there, you can remember the scene. It's a great view. So they said, come and see the beautiful view and explore our mine. It's really weird here. They promoted automobiles coming out. So in the 1920s, when the average Joe started to get cars, they advertised, come and drive your automobile, get out of Hartford, come and visit us. And then they had curiosities. So in addition to the mine and the prison ruins, they had World War I tank, bears, monkeys, thousands of historic artifacts, and they wanted people to come and see these. This was the time of P.T. Barnum and this idea of oddities and curiosities. So it was really a draw for people. This is an image of our big 4-story cell block that's now burned, but these were tourists exploring that. So those private owners had it, and they really built it up, but the state took ownership in 1968. People, the public, were really wanting the state to take over, which can be kind of a surprise, but they saw the site becoming deteriorating. And they thought that the state would take better control and take better care of such a treasure for them. So they took ownership. At that time, they built in the stairs that go into the mine so that visitors no longer had to climb down the ladder. So they made it more accessible. They purged it of all of the non-relevant things like the bears and the monkeys. They said, this is a prison museum. It's not a place of curiosities. But then, unfortunately, so it had a good long run. And then in 2009, as I'm sure most of you are aware, the site closed due to renovations, was the primary reason. So the whole site is very hilly, and it's built on mine tailings, which are just loose debris left over from all the mining years. And so this building right here was falling down. Our big guardhouse in the middle was falling down because it's so unstable. So that was a huge project. The engineers had to figure out how to stabilize it and keep it secure for the years to come. So when they went to go reopen, positions like myself as the site manager and the museum director had retired, so they had to find new people, we had to get public support again, and we were eventually able to do that last year, and we reopened. This is the image of that same guardhouse. So that's what you were looking at before, the back end was falling down. So it's beautiful, it's safe, and we reopened on July 14th, and it was an awesome year. I'll get into that a little bit. So as you can see, this is what visitors see today. So these are a couple aerial shots, the guardhouse again, the ruins, our visitor center's over here. And visitors are welcome to come in. It's primarily self-guided, so we let them explore the ruins. Some of them you can go into, some of them you can't go into, but they're cool to look at. And there'll be, and then we have some tours, and we'll have more tours this year with Wally's help. He was a great guide last year. He welcomed people in, he gave them the history. So this is what visitors can explore above ground on the prison yard. We also allow them into the mine. So this is about, as I'm sure most of you have been, about 400 yards underground. It goes in a loop. It extends, let me see. So it starts over here and it goes all the way under the road and back around. So that's what you're looking at down there. Always 52 degrees, it's cold, it's wet, and it's kind of miserable. And visitors get a really good sense of what it would have been like for prisoners to live there all night long, all day, all night. So we also allow visitors down there with guides, and they really enjoy it. The kids get a kick out of it. So last year, in addition to the prison yard and the mine, we held special programs which really highlight these different themes. So this is kind of a hodgepodge, because that's how I saw last season. It was just a hodgepodge of stuff. Everything from reenactments, the Marquis Fife and Drum, to performances. This is your local theater guild of Simsbury. They put on Tales from the Dungeon, and they'll be doing it again this year. It was a play written about our historic characters, so that was a huge success. We put on a mineral show, a little bit of yoga, and a bat day, and of course Halloween. So the bats come into play because we work very closely with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to work on conserving our bat population. As I'm sure some of you know, bats are very endangered right now because of a disease called white nose syndrome, and we have them hibernate in the mine. So this year they just counted 10 bats. They've since left because it's getting warmer. But we really work hard to prevent the spread of that. So we promote the bats and educate people on their existence and their benefit to the world. So that's a big part. And this was our sum up of last year. This was an infograph I made when I was so excited about how successful it was. We were open from July to October. We saw just over 11,000 visitors in a total of 330 hours, because we were just open weekends. And people like Wally helped me out and gave in about 900 hours of volunteer time, which was amazing. And then we made some money, which I like to say because we work for the state and are in the Department of Economic and Community Development, so I have to throw out our numbers. But overall it was a success, as you can see, and we're excited for this next year. So we'll be opening May 9th. We open May through October, Thursday through Mondays. I hope you can all come. Oh, here, I'll put this on the back table, but I have these rack cards. They just give some more information, so please feel free to take one. Otherwise, moving forward, we plan to preserve the past, so we're continuing renovations, continuing facility maintenance, engaging the present, so we hope to see you all this season, and work on bringing school groups back and encouraging people to come, and then planning for the future. So we'll continue to work on our mission statement and work on making this stay open for the public and be better and bigger than ever. With that, that's my quick overview of Old Newgate. Does anyone have any questions for me? Yes.
What programs do you have planned this year? I saw you had the bats.
Yep. Yeah, so I have, to be honest with you, programming I've had to put on the back burner. I have so many facility maintenance to do right now. But we'll do Bat Day again. Whoops. We'll definitely do Bat Day. We're definitely going to do the plays again. We'll definitely do a mineral show, some reenactments in Halloween. Let's see, some extra ones. Those are the big ones. Otherwise, we're going to offer a lot more tours and special tours. So that'll be exciting on the daily.
And where will it be publicized? So, for example, you have Bat Day?
Yeah, exactly. So I'll make sure that I need to get my website up and running.
Okay.
Otherwise, I publish in the East Granby newsletter. I need to tap into Simsbury. So I need to look into your platforms. So I'll keep trying to do that. And then we're on Facebook, and I'll try to tap into your guys' platforms like that. And then if you want, you can always contact Wally. I have an email list. So you guys have been talking about email. I am going to try to keep up on my email newsletter too. So if you're ever interested in that, you can get in touch with me. I think I have cards here if you want. But there's also contact information on this. Yes?
Morgan, the website, this morning I went to your website, which is pretty extensive. And a fair amount of information. Maybe a little bit, some parts may be a little bit dated.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, so that's on my to-do list, but I prioritize coming here to updating the website for you also. I got to work on it. But thank you. It will be updated. Yes?
What is that building that's in ruin? And what was it?
This one? This one? Yep. This was that 4-story cell block that I showed you. Hold on. That was this. And it burned in 1904 on a fire. The Hartford Courant said, at least it'll be more picturesque this way as a ruin. So. That's the Hartford Courant for you. Any other questions? I know Wally's going to get into some good stuff too. Yes?
There was work being done in the tavern across the way. What is the status and what is the future of that?
Yeah, great question. So we were just able, I mentioned the prison. There is a big white tavern house across the street. That's where the first warden lived and then turned it into a tavern and an inn. Everyone loves it. It's a great house. It's in rough shape, but we were able to get it painted on the outside and a new cedar roof that smells amazing. And we have a couple other cottages on the property that we've been repainted and re-roofed. So we've got the outside secure. The next step is on the inside. So hopefully this season I can work on getting the code up to date. In addition to some of the interior things. And then my goal is for next season to offer limited tours. So maybe once a month we let people in there. Long term, I would love it to be an addition. I would love to open up the second floor to offices and meeting space and rental. And down below, I would love for it to be a cafe of something. But that's pretty long term.
What does it cost to take the tour?
So I've bumped it to $8 for adults, but I think I'm going to do $6 for seniors. Children 6 and under are free. I have all these numbers in my head. I think I'm doing 5 for children, but 6 for seniors. Yep.
Free Sundays?
Yep, and then we have free Sundays. Thanks, Wally. That's another one of our big programs. So all 4 of the state museums are offering free Sundays the 3rd Sunday of the month for Connecticut residents. Oh, 1 second. One question over here. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, Morgan, in terms of volunteers, you talked about, would you want to get a plug in for, since you might...
Yeah, thanks. I always love volunteers. We have a great group of people. I have probably a good 40 that come, but then I have a good 15 or so that have been dedicating to being trained as docents. So Wally has been being trained all season, and they'll be able to give more robust tours. So there's a lot of opportunities to volunteer, everything from events to research to tours. And please reach out to me. There is contact information on this, but I can give you my card. So I'm always eager for more volunteers. Question, yes?
Yeah, a debate about the copper coin, which you said. Was the copper coin from the mine or from elsewhere? It certainly was manufactured on site.
Right.
Was the mine the source of the copper? Do they know?
I don't want to speak totally to that because I don't want to say I don't want to misinform anyone. But my understanding is that Dr. Healy did have a copper mine. And it's my understanding that it was mined out of there. But that means he would have had to smelt it on site. We know the ore isn't very good. It's not like they were finding native copper out of Michigan. So I don't know. It's a good debate, and one we might not ever know the answer to. Yes.
One last question, maybe this is a segue to Wally.
Yeah.
Have you heard, or maybe Wally will fill us in on any esoteric, eerie, or other stories associated with the site, because you are a site manager?
Right. So I just gave Wally and my other volunteers a popular questions list, in which this is one of the questions, and to which my response for everyone is, maybe Wally remembers it, as the state, we are not able to comment on such questions. With that being said,
Here's Wally.
yeah. To be honest, there haven't been much. We have ghost stories that we tell at Halloween. Otherwise, there haven't really been any sightings. We get people down below that take videos and think they're seeing stuff. The only thing that creeps me out is the tavern. I get bad vibes there, but otherwise, I don't really. It's pretty good for the most part. It's like an old friend, Newgate is. But good question.
How did you get to go to prison?
Well, I was really bad. My background is in history.
Pardon me?
My background is in history,
Okay.
in public history. And I just kind of fell in love with the site. And I really like looking at society's criminals. I think it's really important for us as historians to understand who we're criminalizing. So I started this by studying witchcraft history. And that kind of transitioned into prison history.
So you got a lifetime.
Amount of work, I would say so, right? There's always criminals, and it's important to remember who they are. Yes?
Any burial sites on this?
Yeah, we don't have any on the site, besides the first warden was buried on site. The archaeologists, the state archaeologist at the time, Nick Bellantoni, you might have heard of, he researched for many years to find the cemetery, and he eventually found it. It's about, maybe a mile, half a mile down the road north of the prison. It's on private property, so we don't advertise it. And they found the prisoner burial there. None of them were marked in terms of graves, except for the fact that they were marked so that guards didn't bury on top of other prisoners. So we know that's there. There weren't too many deaths, but of course there were some. Good question.
What do you do for bats?
Yeah, so for the bats, we primarily leave them alone. They only come to hibernate and they leave April, so I've been going down there. In the winter, we close off, so October we close and we don't let people in. And then during the season, because you can't cure white nose syndrome, you can only prevent it from being spread. So what we do is we have a green outdoor carpet, and we ask visitors to scrape their feet along it just to get the pores off of their shoes. And we also at times spray for alcohol. I'm trying to look into a really fancy mat that'll help us do that. And it's really only for those people that are cavers, so they can jump from one cave to another. Biologists have literally been able to track people who went to a cave in Ohio and took white nose syndrome to California. It's really scary stuff. So we just prevent it on your shoes.
There's still no treatment, though.
There's not, no. They're finding bats that have that are evolving out of it or have specific genes so they're trying to figure that out, but you can't cure it, yeah. And we just educate people, because still a lot of people, it's still a big issue that people don't like bats and just want to kill them. So just educating people is important too. Any other questions? I'll segue to Wally. Thank you all.
In the old days, before Newgate was the first prison in the colonies ever. So what happened in the old days? Well, in the old days, if you stole a pie from somebody or bumped someone or took a little bit of money, they would put you in the stocks or the pillory, and then your neighbors would throw fruit at you, and that confirmed that you were a bad person not to be associated with. But if you're a bad person, there are no prisons. So let's say you stole a horse. They would brand your forehead with an H, or they would notch your ear. And this marked you for the rest of your life as being a criminal. So in a sense, Newgate was a kind of a kindness place, because they didn't do that there. So for this coming season, I suggested to Morgan that we get some stamps with an H for horse, and C for counterfeiter, B for burglar, A for adulterer, like the Scarlet Letter. And we wouldn't brand the kids, we'd just have an ink pad and stick it on their heads, and then each kid could be a different kind of criminal. She didn't like that either, so she's a great boss, but she's very strict with me. She got little chocolate bats that you can buy now in the visitor center. I suggested getting white cake decorating stuff so you can put white nose syndrome on the bat. She didn't like that either, so I'm really constrained. But anyhow, thanks for coming. I wanted to find out how many people went to Old Newgate when you went down the ladder in the shaft. Wow, quite a few. Okay, I haven't even done that. I was around at that point, but I didn't live near Newgate. I lived in Ledyard, so great to see that. How many went down and up as prisoners? I have to ask that. Okay, I didn't think so. Okay, so, all right, let's get going. Morgan, why isn't this working? Did you turn it off? No. No? There we go. Okay, I stole a lot of the material from this book. Am I blocking anybody really badly? I should stand maybe further over here. Okay. Old Newgate timeline. So she went through that. I'm not going to go through that again. Not going to do that. A piece of marcasite, which is a very beautiful rock, was found or was brought into Simsbury by a Native American, and they thought it contained copper, and they said, okay, somewhere out there is copper, but they didn't quite know where. Turns out marcasite is ferric sulfide, so it has iron and has sulfur, but it ain't got no copper in it. But they didn't know. They didn't have the science back then. Anyhow, the proprietors were the taxpayers of Simsbury, 64 in number, and they managed the mine, and they hired undertakers, having nothing to do with funeral homes, but they undertook the overseeing of the mine, the operation of the mine. Now this is interesting. I tutor math, maybe not well, but I tutor algebra, trigonometry, up through calculus, and I looked at this and I said, for all the copper ready for market, 2/3 went to the Simsbury schoolmaster. So it really was for a good purpose, for educating the children. Does anyone know how many schools there were, elementary schools in Simsbury in the early days? 4. I think it's 12, because they didn't have these big yellow school buses, so you had to walk. And the town, remember the town included Granby and East Granby, so anyhow, so that's for the schoolmasters. 1/3 to this school down in New Haven, which became Yale later on. And are you doing the math now with me?
You're already over.
So somehow the undertakers were going to get 1/10. Maybe they took theirs out first. It's not clear. Anyhow, this is malachite, and malachite is a ore. It contains copper, but not metallic copper. It's bound up in a molecule. And the molecule has 2 coppers, sorry, the hell did I do? It has 2 coppers, a carbonate, and 2 hydroxyls. So you got to get this stuff out. And it's very pretty, it's green. There's not much of it in the mine. And it turns out, for a big piece of rock, they had to cob away, that was the term, all the stuff that wasn't malachite or the other ore that they were after. And that's where the tailings came from that made the building start to fall down hundreds of years later. So anyhow, that's what they were after. It's neat because when the visitors come in, they look around, and I kind of offer to give them a little background, and they look at the wall behind me, and there's this big spot of green malachite, and the kids love it, and they say, oh, there's some, can we have it? No, you can't take it home, but you can look at it. And when they go in the mine, you can also see spots of green where the mining occurred. But it's not a rich mine, it doesn't have a lot. So for a big piece of rock that they would take out, there was only a little bit of malachite. And then you have to smelt it with heat and charcoal. So it was very, very hard to make money. They never did. So they were hoping to, they were hoping to get rich. They didn't. Copper is well, you know about copper. If you have a cell phone, there's about half an ounce of copper. I tell people that 200 years, 300 years from today, there will be no fiber optics going to your house. There'll be something else. There will be water probably going to your house, but there always will be copper wires from the power company because nothing else works except copper. The only better conductor is silver, and there's obvious financial reasons for not using silver for wires. It's also useful for vessels. You can coat the bottom of an ocean-going vessel and keep the worms from eating your ship and sinking it. And for alloying with gold. Very important. We'll get to that shortly. So they started out, it was in the woods, it was in the forest. There was nothing there. There were no roads, there were no houses, there were no farms. And someone dug a hole 3 feet in diameter and 30 feet deep. That was the only way in or out from 1707 to 1972 when the state put in the stairs. That's 265 years of going up and down a ladder. It was about 30 feet long. It was wood, it was rickety, it was probably slimy, you know, from the moisture from the mine. And the prisoners were shackled at the legs, so they actually had to hop from step to step. Once there were enough escapes, they shackled everybody to prevent people from running away. So this is a duplication. This is what it looks like in the mine. I have many times while in there bumped my head. I can assure you the rocks have not softened with age. But there's only one spot really where it's very, not very high, so you really have to bend over, which is a challenge for some. Little kids love it because they can run through there. And here's a flash picture. This shows the 4 foot high section. And it's kind of neat. When you look with a flashlight, you can see the ore. You can see veins of ore. Again, not enough to make anyone rich. And this is what you see when you go down the stairs. So some people are a little bit claustrophobic. We invite them to walk down the stairs. It's well lit. There's handrails on middle and sides. They can go down and this is what they will see. And they get an idea, okay, maybe it wasn't so much fun being a miner, let alone a prisoner. The prisoners got awakened at 4 a.m. and they came up, had their sumptuous breakfast, which probably wasn't very much at all. Then they... I have 2 degrees in electrical engineering, and I neglected to plug in the power supply. Notice how polite it was. You might want to plug in your, yeah. So this is what people see. Some people just don't want to go any further. I understand it. It doesn't smell bad, but it's dank. And there are LED lights, there are exit lights, there's people around to help if someone gets a little nervous, but it is, what, about 400 yards, Morgan said, of loop.
Wally, how high is that, or what's the height there? You said 4
I would say that's 8 feet.
8 feet, okay.
And if you think that we're now about 35 feet underground, do you have any idea with the weight of the rock above us? I don't, but it's a lot. It's a big number. And those little pieces of telephone pole are there, I think, to make us feel safer. But there are geotechnical engineers who go in every year, including this year, and they say, no, it's okay, it's safe. Hope they're right. Yeah. This is very, actually, why was it such a great prison, a great idea? One way in and one way out. That 3 foot shaft that's 30 feet deep on the ladder, you put a hatch over the top, put a padlock on it, no problem. Except they had a well. Even back then they had a well. So it wasn't something you could easily climb in or out of, but if someone lowered a rope, you could climb out, and some people did escape that way. And there's a little bit of story about that.
This is separate from the area you go in?
No.
Shaft?
Yeah, you can actually walk under the well shaft and look up and see that sunlight.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so I took that picture. So the escape-proof prison, John Hinson, he was known to be a bad guy. He had escaped from a lot of places. Well, Newgate's the place for him. He came December 22nd, and on January 10th, the warden went over and said, John, I got your breakfast. and there was no answer, and there was nothing left in the mine. Turns out it was during a blizzard. His girlfriend, they think, there were footprints, female footprints, going right to the ore shaft, which was yet another way out. She lowered a rope down. John Hinson climbed out, and then departing, there were male and female footprints that went off into. They were never found, as far as I know.
What letter would he have had on his head?
What light?
Letter. You said A-H-C.
Oh, he was a counterfeiter, so he could have had his ear notched or a C.
Okay.
Yeah, and he told people that's for competent. That's why they put it. That's what I would do anyhow. So this is the actual reward from the Hartford, well, it wasn't called the Hartford Current, it was then called the Current. I think it was a weekly. And this is $10, whoops, $10 for John Hinson. Notice the date, January 10th, 1774. So this was 18 days, or a little bit after that, after he had escaped. $10. $10 was worth about $185 in those days. So that was quite a reward, actually. So the specifics, the prison was opened for these kinds of people. When Morgan isn't around, I tell people also adultery was a crime. And particularly if there's little kids, and I say, ask mom and dad later, but adultery means you've reached the age of 18. And there's certain activities that you then engage in. And I leave it up to the parents to explain. But there were tons of escapes. Here's inflation, $15 reward, and this is from what, 1827. This is about 2 months before the prison closed and everyone moved to Wethersfield. So from the day it opened until virtually the day it closed, people were escaping. And you would too if you were a prisoner there. It was a horrid, horrid life. So you got awakened at 4 a.m., you worked for 12 hours, at 4 p.m. you were put back into the mine, and that was it. There was no light. There were no toilets, there was very little warmth, 52 degrees. I guess that's nice during a heat wave because it's sort of air conditioned. And in the winter, 52 degrees beats being in a blizzard up above, but it was 52 dank degrees. 5 prisoners attempted escape by tunneling out. Here's another one we tell at Halloween. And there were 5 of them. 2 of them were killed. The other 3 escaped. They heard the rumbling and they ran. We think they still may be there. Well, you know what 200 years would do, but it scares the kids. It's great stuff to tell them. All remaining prisoners in April 1774 escaped. The prison was empty in May, and they built a log house over the shaft for a little more security. They also hired more guards. One of the problems with a prison like this is it costs the state money to run it. Every month they had to pay for the food, the clothing for the prisoners, more so the guard salaries. Very, very expensive to hire all the people that were needed for 24/7 coverage. 6 prisoners escaped in 1774 after beating up John Viets, the first warden. Most were recaptured by townspeople. Imagine you've been underground for a year or 2. You haven't had a shower in a year or 2. Your clothing looks like you haven't had new clothing for a year or 2. And there you are walking down the streets of Simsbury, near the general store. You're walking by a farm. Do you think you might stand out possibly as a criminal?
You smell out.
Even to a blind man, yes, exactly. So a lot of them were recaptured. Thereafter, they used the leg irons on the prisoners. So they had to somehow hop up the ladder. They probably had very strong arms and lifted themselves. And then once they're at the top of the ladder, they had to hop to their workstation. So they made nails. They made a special kind of nail, very sought after. They made barrels. They made baskets. They made giant wagons for the farmers. And they made shoes. They say they could buy the materials for the shoes for about $1, and they could sell them for about $10. So it was very lucrative. There were about 20 to 25 prisoners every day making shoes, which was a pretty easy work task. Even with all that, and they'd sell the shoes, they'd sell the wagons, they'd sell the barrels, they'd sell the nails, they still were a money sink for the state. The state had to pay for the food and the salaries. There's George saying, I got some really bad dudes, and I mean, the prison had a reputation for being not a fun place. as you can imagine. Here's another story, allegedly true. A giant rock was blocking a drainage tunnel to keep the prisoners from escaping through that tunnel that had been carved for drainage of the water. They stole some charcoal, the prisoners did, and they tried to crack the rock to make it possible to move it a little bit, as half the weight maybe, and they could go around it. It didn't crack the rock, it never got hot enough, and three people died from smoke inhalation. So ventilation was not really good. Loyalist prisoners in 1777, they gave their thank you to the guards by burning down the log house over the mine shaft, and then prisoners were moved to other jails. This is how they spelled it in those days. And so from 1777 until 1780, the prison was not a prison anymore until it opened again. 28 prisoners escape. For some reason, they thought it's an okay idea at 10 p.m. at night to have the wife of one of the prisoners come to visit the husband. So they opened the gate at the top. This had been pre-planned. The prisoners came out with rocks in their hands. They killed a guard. They beat up some other guards. And they all escaped, 28 prisoners. 16 were recaptured within 1 week. Then POWs came. British POWs came in 1781. 1782, it burned again. 1790, they actually hogged out a huge space and they put in what we think were bunk beds so that people could sleep one above the other, not on the cold, damp rock. It was always damp. They also put a wooden pick. There was nothing around here. Once you got out of the mine, you could run in the woods. So they finally put up a wooden picket fence with 10-inch square, 10 by 10 wood columns and 5-inch iron spikes along the top to improve security. Didn't work. People still escaped. A workhouse was added. Here's some of the stuff that they made. By the way, once they got to their work site, they were chained to their work site. So even if they somehow thought they could escape, they didn't. Buildings were added as the population grew. In 1802, a Simsbury builder was hired and he built the 12-foot high stone wall that you'll see there today. So that was done by one of our locals. The 4-story building was put up in 1824. And the reason for that was it could hold some convicts. For the first time, female prisoners were allowed. There were 4 or 5 of them. There's conflict about how many there were. 2 were counterfeiters, 1 was a daytime burglar. Turns out that if I burgled your house at night, that was a serious crime. But if you invited me over maybe to talk or something and I happened to see some silverware, you went in the kitchen and I put some silverware in my pocket, that's not considered as bad a crime. That was considered daytime burglary. You know, I wasn't planning to steal your silverware, I just thought it was a good idea when you left the room. So there were a lot of people who were incarcerated for daytime burglary. And in the bottom is a treadmill. Now you're thinking, isn't that nice? The prisoners had an exercise room. They probably had barbells and they had these stretching machines. Wait till you see the picture of the treadmill. These were common in Europe. This picture is not from Old Newgate, it's from Europe, but we don't have any kind of drawings or anything. But what you have is men, 20 to 25 at a time, the records show, and they would step on the ledge and then the wheel would rotate down from their weight. So they'd step up again and step up again and step up again. The wheel would rotate and they would have a 90-degree gear and they would grind grain. So there was need to grind corn and barley and wheat and any other stuff that they wanted flour from. I guess the problem is it was so demanding, they had 10 minutes on and 5 minutes to lie on the ground just getting their breath again, and then they had to go back on the wheel. So it was one of the most punishing tasks. I'd much rather be up there sewing shoes or maybe banging wrought nails or making baskets. I would love to make baskets. Now Higley, my understanding is Dr. Higley's place was just south of Route 20. So if you go from Old Newgate down Newgate Road, you get to Route 20, it's a big stoplight there. You go about another half mile on the left was where Higley's house was. I'm told he had his own mines. He did his own mining of copper, and he was a very, very bright fellow. He figured out how to make metal stamps so he could take discs of copper and turn them into coins. This one is kind of beat up. They were used all over the area as currency. So if you went into the Veets Tavern and you wanted a cold one, you'd put down a Higley copper and say, give me a cold one, they would. If you went to the grocery store then to get some flour or whatever, you could pay in Higley coppers. This one, in lousy condition, if you're a coin collector, you'd say, oh, I wouldn't buy that. You can get for $20,000 typically. These are current prices that I researched last year. Why? Well, the reason is there were so many of these made, they were desirable because the copper was extremely fine copper, 0.999 or whatever it was. So when you're a goldsmith, if you have 24 karat gold and you want to make a ring or a necklace or a bracelet or something, gold is very soft, very malleable. So you make a nice round ring, the first time you hit it, it turns into an oval. It scratches easily. So by adding copper to the gold, you go from 24 karat, which is 100% gold, to 18 karat, which is 75% gold. Where does that 6 carats come from? From pure copper, and it makes a great alloy. Well, when you do that, if you can find one of these, here's a Higley copper. There's one kind of right across the street in the Simsbury Historical Society. I've done some work there scanning some old records for them. I'm kind of friends with them. They won't even let me see it. It's so valuable. I don't even know what condition it is, but something in this kind of condition, $200,000 is a recent sale price. You'll notice the 3 at the bottom. Higley originally put something like 3 pence on it, and the soldiers, the British soldiers, knocked on his door and said, this is actually counterfeiting, doctor. Would you please stop it or we're going to take you away? So he stopped, but he still remembered to put a 3 down there just to remind people what it might be. Anyhow, they were so sought after, not only in the United States by goldsmiths, but all over Europe over many, many decades. So though thousands were made, there's only a few left. If you happen to run into one, you're a very wealthy person. So other fun facts about the prisons. Why were the prisoners who escaped so healthy? There were very few people who died. And the reason they think is they were not exposed to the general population, so they didn't transmit diseases. Yes, a few died, and they were buried in the cemetery right across from the, what is it, Copper Mine Prison? What's the golf course? I'm sorry, the golf course. Copper Hill Golf Course. So on the other side from Copper Hill Golf Course is where the cemetery is, but as Morgan said, it's on private property, so you can't walk there or see it. Visitors came, so even before it turned into a tourist attraction, visitors would come and watch the prisoners at work, and they'd see them bang away on making wagons and making nails and what have you. The mine was pure darkness. In there were fleas and ticks and bed bugs and lice. It was just a horrible, horrible place to be. It was another place, or another facet was to learn to be a criminal. So let's say, oh, you sir, you look to me like you might be a good horse thief.
I'd be an A.
You got the age?
Yeah. A.
A. Well, that I don't need too much instruction in because I read a lot. But let's say you were a horse thief and I'm a counterfeiter, and we're locked for 12 hours down in the mine, and we start chatting. And I say, gee, would you like to learn how to counterfeit? And you say, sure. So I teach you some stuff, more about how to pass counterfeit money, how to distract the clerk, how to take a 20-pound note, whatever. And then you teach me how to be a horse thief, how to get into the barn without making the horse or the dog bark, and how to steal the horse. Now we both have resumes that have been enhanced, and we find another person who's maybe what would be another good crime? B for burglar. So how do you break into a house at night without, and so on. So just as today, you often came out worse off as a criminal than when you went in. You had more ways to make money. Skeleton keys. These guys were incredible. They they took the pewter buttons from their shirts and pants, melted them down, and made skeleton keys to unlock their arm and leg shackles. And then they could escape. Speaking of which, in the guard building underneath there are what's called jug cells, J-U-G. I spent hours researching this. It has nothing to do with jugs of cider or wine or anything like that. It's from the French joug, I think. I'm not a French speaker. And it means attachment point. So if you were a bad dude because you'd escaped 3 times or you mouthed off too often to the corporal, or they would put you in a place, either solitary confinement in the mine or up above in the jug cells, and they would attach your shackles to the building itself. So there's where it would be useful to have a skeleton key. Yeah. One of the adulterers, the 5 women prisoners, one of the adulterers, her first name is Comfort, which I always thought was kind of charming. And one was for murder, and her name was Thurza Mansfield. And she took a hatchet. She had a hatchet and a husband, and the next day she only had the hatchet left. She just planted it in a husband's head, twice actually. And she was convicted of murder. She should have been executed, but for some reason she wasn't. And the play, if you get to see the play this summer, put on by the Theatre Guild of Simsbury, she is one of the characters, the murderer, and they cast her beautifully. I don't know if anyone here is related to this woman, but she was just as scary as mean. The little kids sitting there were probably peeing down their legs from fear. This woman was so well cast as Thurza Mansfield, thank you, I got it. All right, almost done. Prison closed in 1827. All the prisoners marched about 26 miles to Wethersfield in shackles, except if they were sick or lame or lost a limb, then maybe they rode in a wagon. They didn't have air-conditioned buses available at that weekend. So they marched to Wethersfield, except for Abel Starkey. Abel Starkey, the legend goes, and I first heard it many decades ago from the guard there, he bribed a guard, and the guard lowered a rope into the well, and Abel started climbing up. And at some point, the guard said, wait a minute, if he gets caught, he's going to rat me out, that he bribed me. So allegedly, the guard took his knife and cut through the rope just enough that it was weakened. And Abel Starkey climbed up almost to the top, and the rope parted, and he fell to his death in the mine. Had he waited 24 hours, he would have marched to Wethersfield. So he's the one who didn't make it to Wethersfield. When they started mining again, well, they thought, well, now we got steam pumps, we got dynamite, we got new technology, we got better lighting, yeah, we can do it. Well, they didn't make any money again. This was one of the things that was on exhibit. This is a Conestoga wagon. Right now it's in the East Granby Historical Society on North Main Street, but it was in the prison yard as an attraction. People would come just to see stuff. There were a mother bear and cub, monkeys. They had dances in the guardhouse upstairs, concerts, the observation deck that Morgan showed you. So there's a lot of stuff in there to make it interesting. That's why we don't allow people there. It looks like with a good wind it may come down. I don't think it will, but and here is the monkey cage. The monkeys escaped, just like the prisoners. They hated it there. They were captured in New Britain by a trapper who knew that they would like a banana, so he somehow captured and brought them back. In New Britain, yes. This is a sketch done actually by one of the counterfeiters who was a prisoner, and what it shows is the picket fence of the 10 by 10 logs, and then you can see maybe on the edges there's spikes. Here maybe is a good place to see them. These are the metal spikes that stuck up 5 inches. Here's a guy being whipped. Although the corporal punishment was very minor, they were limited by law to 10 strokes on the back. They could not do more than that. They could deny you some food, they could put you on the treadmill, but they couldn't kill you or really do you much harm. So what's happening now? Well, Morgan went over that. This is when the 5th Connecticut Regiment came, and they come in uniform. These guys are crazy, but in a good way. They'll spend thousands of dollars to get a functioning musket, and they care for it like anyone would care for a precision machine. The costumes, they march, they do everything that would have happened during the Revolutionary War. And they were there for the entire day. And they brought along with them stuff, their equipment. I thought this could have been, I took this picture, I thought it could have been taken in 1820. There is the door to the 3-foot shaft that goes down into the mine. And here is the guard ready to capture anyone who got out during the day. He was a wonderful, wonderful, he looks like a wax person, but he's not. Oh dear, this guy has been captured. He's either a local criminal or an escaped from Old Newgate, and he's being logged in again by the captain, and he will be shortly put into the mine after he does his work detail. This was very, very good for the sale of underwear. The guys would fire it maybe 10 or 12 times during the day. No musket or no cannonball, but they put in a lot of powder and a wad, and they would fire it off at random times. And if you were within 50 feet, it was time to check your BVDs. There's one of the little critters. They don't eat people. Kids ask, ooh, are they going to bite me? No, they don't. They eat insects. So one bat can eat more than its weight of insects in one night. During Bat Day, these two sisters came in, this one has a bat shirt, this one has a bat dress and a bat shirt. The little kids, you know, what are 4 kinds of bats, Morgan, there? Four?
Yeah, right now we have 4.
4 kinds of bats at the mine. This was the Headless Horseman at Halloween. Here's the skeleton of the horse. This prisoner never did make it. He must have had very weak arms, but he was there all day trying to hop over the fence to get away. Does anyone know of Adolph's in Hartford? It's on New Britain Avenue near the very east end. They have the best sausages and worst and so on. They came about 3 or 4 times. And this guy, this is the manager, he really got into it. This little boy came and he was enthralled with the whole thing. He loved it. So he bought play shackles. You could actually take your brother or sister and put shackles on them, and they temporarily restrain them. And he said, would you put it on me? And I said, gladly. I was there. So I put it on him and I said, could you act really fierce like you're an escaped prisoner and you really don't want to get hassled or caught again? So that's his boy, am I fierce. And here's again the Theater Guild of Simsbury. At the end of the season, Morgan asked people to write one word, all during the season, write the one word that describes your feelings. What are you taking away from Old Newgate? And I just love this, because if you look at some of the words here, good, bad, awful, meow, hell, invigorating, harsh, great. As people left, and I was often stationed right there where they come in and they would leave at the end, I say, what's your favorite part? And to a person, I never heard anything other than the mine. The mine. So as long as you're able-bodied, and a few people couldn't, they had crutches or something, but at least go down the stairs and have a look. So thanks, and appreciate the lunch and your attention, and if you have any questions that Morgan didn't already answer for you, she or I could take a stab at it.
Is the jukebox still in
Yes.
dance hall?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Is the jukebox still in the dance hall?
Yes.
Yes, it is. It needs some work.
I know, it's in bad
Gee,
shape.
Dad, it's a Wurlitzer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
too bad it's in bad shape.
Do you have nickels to put in, or now silver dollars probably?
Wally, what's the, well, I know you say it's going to be open, I guess, Morgan, you said it's going to be open from Thursday to Monday. What are the hours?
10 to 4:30.
10 to 4:30 every day?
Every day, 5 days a week, 10 to 4:30. Yep. Question?
I hear they fed the prisoners lobsters.
I'm sorry.
I hear they fed the prisoners lobsters.
That was only on Sunday afternoon after the dance. They would have a, and if you were allergic to seafood, they're very sensitive. They had T-bone steak or filet mignon.
But lobsters back then were not.
They were fed to prisoners
That's
and
right.
criminals.
That's exactly right, because they weren't that delicacy at all.
And they were used for fertilizer, so when you planted corn, you throw a lobster in.
Right.
Boy, they were dumb, huh? Any other questions? Well, thanks, folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.